Good morning, everyone. Has everybody got their coffee in hand and ready to roll?
You bet.
All right. Okay. I think we probably are ready to get started. Bill, do you want to go ahead and get us going?
Sure. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. We're excited to get restarted on Reimagine. I know most of you were involved when we went on pause last August. And today we'll be updating you on some things we've been doing since August and kind of what we're expecting to do moving forward. But before I go over the agenda, let me start with a safety moment. As many people know, we have a forecasted blizzard for this weekend. So here's some things to think about as you prepare for our blizzard. And I'm going to point this at Deborah, since this could be her first Colorado blizzard as somebody from California. So watch the forecast because they do change, and they do change quite frequently. Stock up and charge up. So just in case, make sure, and somebody who went to the grocery store last night, there was a lot of people out. So stock up and also charge up your phones. Prep your car if you're going to think about it, gas, wipers, wiper fluid. A bag of kitty litter in the back of your car is always useful. In case you do get stuck, it's something that does help you get traction. Check your pipes in your house just in case there's any opportunity for any freezing, but hopefully not. And do this all before it hits, not during the snowstorm. So obviously in the next day or so. And then if you do have pets, make sure you bring them inside. And then finally, plan ahead and for snow and ice removal, because again, if we have one of these larger storms, it does take a while to clean off your driveway and sidewalks. So plan for that. So with that, Holly or Matt, Matthew, can you bring it? Yeah, there you go. Bring up the agenda, please. There we go. So just went over the safety moment. So we do have Deborah Johnson, our new general manager, who has started this past November, and she's going to give you a little bit of introduction to herself. I know many of you have met her, and then she's going to talk about a couple of current items that are on the agenda for the agency. And then we're going to go into some additional RTD updates related to Reimagine and some of what's going on with us from a kind of ridership and financial perspective. And then we're going to get back into Reimagine and talk a little bit about where we were, and then talk about kind of where we're going with the system optimization plan, guiding principles, and then really focus what we're going to be focusing on mostly over the next year is the mobility plan for the future. And then finally get into some public engagement. So without further ado, let me introduce Deborah. So Deborah, who comes to us from California, you take it away.
Good morning, and thank you so much, Bill. And thank you, everyone, for participating in Reimagine RTD. This is an exciting time. I mean, considering we're in a pandemic, being able to look at our system from top to bottom and assess what it is that we need to do collectively to enhance our transportation network is really exciting. And this is coming from someone who has had the opportunity to be involved in comprehensive operations analysis over the course of my career, and most notably just finished one at my previous agency. So I am so excited about this opportunity and want to thank you all for your interest and engagement to really enhancing our transportation network. So as introduced, I'm Deborah Johnson, the new General Manager and CEO. While I may be new, I'm not new to the transit space. I am a proud servant leader who has been doing this going on my 29th year. As indicated, having been here just a few months, I have been busily acclimating myself to the region, being a part of listening sessions and, discerning what it is that I don't know as we get on this trajectory to enhance the organization to maximize its full potential. With that, we can go to the next slide. So one thing that I really have leaned into since joining the organization is the efforts of the Accountability Committee, which I know several of you that are on this meeting this morning are a part of, have an understanding of what it's all about. And really, I am fortunate that I have been able to engage and lean into the discussion and share my thoughts because I really do think there are some great things coming out of the accountability. Specifically, as you can see on the slide, and I'm not one to read, these are just nuggets for you. But as we look at governance, finance, and operations, and clearly you can see the intersectionality with Reimagine RTD and operations as we look at optimizing efficiencies as how we deliver transit service. Are we really, focused on what we need to do to get people to the activity centers? What can we do as it relates to partnerships and things of the like? And the preliminary report that we recently received that's made available to the public actually deals with, the fare box recovery ratio. As being a transit professional coming into this organization, the fare box recovery ratio was a lot different from what I'm accustomed to in the transit industry. So there are statutory recommendations pertaining to that, where it's not just looking at all the revenue we get, but really how are we optimizing our service delivery model? Also, as we look at leveraging commercial and retail aspects near transfer facilities. And then there's the parking fees at our facilities, at our transit lots. And then what's optimal is public and private partnerships. And I think that's what it's all about. I'm one that clearly believes that transportation is interwoven into the communities in which we serve. And in doing so, I know I can't run this organization by myself, and it's a collective effort because we're moving people. And in public transportation, the optimal word there is public. Recognizing that there is legislation that has been introduced in the legislature, and there are some refinements that I am working with our union partners on. We anticipate bringing this before the board to take a position on, but let me be clear, throughout the course of the accountability committee, members of the RTD board, as well as myself and members of the team have been engaged. So we embrace this as we go forward, trying to shape the future of RTD. Next slide, please. So something that's really been prevalent as we talk about transit operations throughout the country. One thing's for certain, everybody has a laser focus on ridership. While ridership is a metric to look at how a service or a transit network is performing, it is a metric, not the only metric, because if in fact it was the only metric, then we would have had an abysmal year in 2020. Now, considering that as a backdrop, Congress has really invested in the transportation network, recognizing that it has been a viable conduit in keeping the economy moving. With our frontline employees here that are essential, moving other essential employees, it's been paramount in reference to looking at the country holistically and getting people where they need to go when they need to get there. So with that as a backdrop, recognizing in 2020, when no one knew about the future, and nobody typically does, but it looked very dismal. And the RTD board of directors, in conjunction with staff, made some difficult decisions in reference to balancing our bottom line. And we received some CARES Act funding, which was the first round of stimulus that helped us keep individuals employed during the course of the calendar year of 2020. Most recently, on January 10th, we learned of a second round of stimulus funding we refer to as CRISA. Now, the intent of that money is to ensure the continuity of transit services, and the language in the statute specifically spoke to ensuring that we were reinstating staff that may have been furloughed and that had been laid off. And what this slide here depicts is what RTD intends to do with the money that has been allocated. Now, let me qualify by saying we have yet to receive monies because this is a reimbursable funding that we are receiving through this act. And basically, it is geared all toward service delivery and the maintenance of such. And what I mean by that is the entire roll-up of what I would qualify as delivering transit service and revenue service hours, that is. So when you see on this slide, the second bullet that's indented, $180 million, what that really means is that we're investing that money in the continuity of transit operations over the course of 2 years, in what we really refer to as our service change or run boards. It's what an operator gets so he or she knows what they're doing for the day. And so with that, what we want to ensure that we maintain a sense of continuity of operations. And so we're, allocating that money for the continuity of service, utilizing that $180 million. So that goes from, our car cleaners to operators, to dispatchers, to folks in service delivery that are, looking at set schedules and things of the like, because while we have frontline employees, there's interdependencies and there's a lot of different moving parts in ensuring that we can have a bus pull out or a rail car leave the facility at its designated time and meet those time points. Additionally, some things that were done to balance our budget was looking at budgeted overtime. And what that's all about is to keep our vehicles in a state of good repair. We do budget for overtime, recognizing that we have vehicles out in delivery throughout the course of the day. We may have to do things relative to preventative maintenance to ensure that we can, maintain our vehicles to 12 to 15 years or 500,000 miles as specified by the Federal Transit Administration. And so oftentimes there may be nuances with the maintenance of such where we had no idea that we needed to do something very analogous to anyone that has a personal vehicle that they utilize. There are things that come up in reference to maintaining that vehicle in a state of good repair. And additionally, as it relates to our non-union employees, we did implement furloughs, and these funds will help us forego those furloughs. One thing for certain is with our reduction in staff on the salary side, recognizing when we have people on furlough, there's days in which we don't have people here doing work. And so this was paramount to ensure the continuity of operations. And so I'll jump down to the last bullet and talk about the approximate $14 million as it relates to additional uses. As I qualified, this CRISA money is specifically for transit operations. However, what we intend to do is do a fund swap, recognizing that we are working with the accountability committee. There are some recommendations for the betterment of the organization. Most recently, there was a state performance audit as relates to RTD, specifically in reference to the retention of frontline employees, how we're doing scheduling, supervisorial training, and things of the like. So we want to ensure that we have adequate resources to enhance those functions that are paramount to our core business. So that's just a thumbnail sketch to ensure that you have an understanding of our due diligence with these public funds and how it will benefit the region in which we serve. Next slide. Well, it looks like I'm handing it off to my colleagues, to Holly, but I want to thank you all for your participation once again. I will be here with you throughout the morning because, as I said before, this is a critical piece in any transit operation. And just quickly, in the course of my career, typically a comprehensive operations analysis is done within a transit agency every 5 to 7 years. It's really the roadmap that enables us to provide the service in a manner in which is reflective of what the community needs. As we all know, things change. There's development that takes place. There's businesses that may change. There may be different aspects, and it doesn't make any sense having transit service going to where the people aren't in need of getting to and fro activity centers. And what I mean by activity centers, I'm talking about employment sites, I'm talking about cultural entertainment venues, I'm talking about, airports, institutions of higher learning, schools, and all that. So with that, we're in capable hands with Ms. Buck. And so I will yield the floor and look forward to the engagement we have this morning. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. We're happy to have you here. Okay, a couple of other updates. We're going to give a couple of other updates on what's been happening with RTD, up to a couple of questions at that time after I get through these next couple slides. Then we're going to give everybody an update on what's been happening, what happened last year with Reimagine RTD, where we stand right now, and then what we're going to be doing over this coming year. In the last half of our time together is really an engagement exercise where we're going to solicit input from you on strategies you'd like to ensure that RTD is considering and are in the hopper of consideration as we move forward and develop this plan. So first off, this slide shows, you may recall that towards the summer of 2020, RTD provided us a really terrific map that showed what ridership looked like route by route throughout the system compared to what it was in February of 2020. So pre-pandemic to sort of middle summer pandemic. we thought it would be interesting to give an update to show what happens February 2021 compared to February 2020. So the first set of numbers provide what's the ridership retention by the day of the week. So during weekdays, we've retained about 36%. On the weekends, we're somewhere between half and 3/4 of the ridership are in place still that were there pre-pandemic time. Now, the next set of bullets describes what's happening by service type. So we can see that those regional services, to Deborah Johnson's point, to the regional services that are hitting some of those big activity centers because we haven't been going into the office as much. Those regional services are down around the 10% mark, but the local services have retained a fair amount of riders in the range of over 40%. We also know that on the route by route basis, there are some routes that have really retained a lot of service. Those are your Colfax routes, the 15 routes along Federal have retained a lot of service. To some of those that are in really serving that core area, dense area, a lot of ridership, even pre-pandemic, and they have been able to retain a fair bit of ridership post-pandemic as well. So just an update. I think the big takeaway here is that from the last time we looked at the information in the middle of 2020 to now, February 2021, there's not a notable change. It hasn't gone up remarkably, but ridership also has not dropped off. We've held fairly constant to that, those early pandemic numbers we looked at. The next item is just to let you know that RTD was able to adopt their midterm financial plan. It's the 6-year plan. And this identifies that I think the big takeaway here is that RTD is not anticipating being able to get back to those pre-pandemic number of revenue hours, the amount of service that they provide, until past 2026. Similarly, just as a result of their fiscal limitations. Similarly, both the fiscal capacity to support Fast Track's revenue hours beyond the current levels, as well as any new Fast Track's capital construction, they're also anticipating nothing new through the year 2026 as they look at their midterm financial plan. Some great items that we had reported out right before we went on pause. RTD has a lot of partnerships. We talked a lot about the partnerships that RTD has in place and some that have been in place over the years. And there were 2 that were underway towards the summer of last year that have made some headway. The first was a partnership with Uber to support and complement Access-a-Ride services in South Aurora. That service is on the ground now and getting some good reviews and is up and running. There is also a partnership with Metro Taxi to support and complement the FlexRide services. I think there's 7 different FlexRide services that are in that sort of tech center, Lone Tree area. And the Metro Taxi is really close to being up and running. I think they have just a few more things to work out, but it's very close, and that's exciting to get some that service on the ground as well. A new partnership that has come to light is the partnership with a group called, there's some debate about the proper pronunciation. I think it's Kuti. And Kuti is a group that plans, designs, and deploys custom modular mobility as a service software platform solutions. So RTD is working with Kuti. And so this is a FlexRide app that allows it more of an active and engaged ride hailing. So it looks a little more like an Uber style look than the old FlexRide service app used to. So I think that will provide some really improve the desirability of that using that service as well, make it a little bit easier. So we're excited to show those progress on those. And I'd like to just take a quick pause here and see if there's any questions about those, any quick questions for our CEO and General Manager, Deborah Johnson. Katie, do we have any hands or anything in the chat?
No, I think we're all good.
Oh, let's see.
Oh, there's a couple.
Thank you. Took a little while to find the hand raise function. I'm curious about the sort of the static level of retention year over year, because at least it's been my casual impression that I've seen an increase, somewhat of an increase as the year has gone on. I'm wondering if there's any analysis as to why that might be.
Are you referring to the ridership numbers?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. There are some particular routes that have seen some upticks, and RTD has adjusted some of the services to make sure that they're allowing for social distancing and all of the requirements there, and trying to maintain that good schedule and on-time effectiveness. But on a whole, we haven't seen a big uptick in that.
Okay, I'm wondering, do you think any of those mitigation efforts has discouraged ridership? With some of the social distancing and things like that. Are we discouraging folks from coming back by anything we're doing?
Yeah, I don't know that I have an assessment on that. Bill or Brian, would you? Or
we've tried to be very proactive. I think there's research out there that says that transit is safe. There's been national research about that. I think we've been trying to promote that. The social distancing aspects on our vehicles, certainly is a limiting factor. I mean, the fact that we can only have a third the capacity that we normally do is a real big issue for us, and that is limiting our ability to obviously to pick up passengers. I mean, I don't know individually, and I don't know if any others on the call know of any specifics from any surveys we've done, but I do know that, like I said, we've really tried to promote that transit is safe, that it is reliable, and that that people should be using it. And beyond that, I haven't seen anything to note that we are discouraging people from using transit specifically.
I just wanted to explore that. I also noted that on the mall ride, especially, that's an indicator that you can't carry people to work who aren't going to work. They're either furloughed or they're working from home, like I am, right? So 18% on the mall ride is actually a pretty shocking figure.
And I think with the mall ride, we've cut back service quite a bit. Normally our normal service is every 90 seconds to 3 minutes, and I think we're at about a 6-minute headway during the day. So it's quite a bit different than usual.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Bill.
Euless?
Yeah, thanks, Holly. Appreciate it. So going back to I guess Cootie, the app there, and I might have missed this, is what's the geographic boundaries of I guess this service is being provided there? I'm just curious about that.
Bill, do you want to jump in there? Oopsie.
Actually, I'm not that familiar. Brian, are you more familiar with what's going on with the Cootie?
Yeah, this works. This application is intended to provide the continuity between a flex ride trip and a fixed route trip, which is the big improvement that enables you to do that throughout the district, actually, wherever we have the combination of and we do, obviously, connections between our flex ride vehicles and the timing and the payment on our fixed route services.
Got you. So is it an open platform? In other words, if there's another third party provider or micro mobility provider, could they utilize this platform as well, and then have that service hook up with kind of the fixed route service that exists on RTD?
Right now, it's limited to this particular vendor. They're the ones who have created the mobility as a service platform for us.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
And I think I saw a chat comment as well. And General Manager Johnson, this one I think maybe for you. It asks, will there be an effort to build reserves to help avoid layoffs in the future?
So thank you very much for that question, Holly. As I indicated, right now, as we look at our forecast going forward, we recognize that the monies that we have received from stimulus, we're holding that off for the 2 years, recognizing that any transit service delivery effort, 75% is labor intensive. We are working holistically for the betterment of operations. And of course, with what I just said as the backdrop, that aspect is being focused on the labor aspect that will enable us to do our core operations. So while we are looking to build reserves, it's not specifically toward the retention of employees, but we wouldn't be able to do our work without. So there's intersectionality overall as we plan for our budget going forward. And Doug McLeod is on the call as well. And Doug, if you have anything further to augment what I said, please feel free to do so, sir.
Thank you, General Manager. And yeah, there's still a lot of moving pieces, I suppose, on the finance side. So one of the things that we're waiting on, the MTF, the midterm financial plan was presented with numbers back in November. We've got some additional financial information since that time, including the CRIS funding, which General Manager Johnson spoke to earlier. The one area that we're uncertain about is what it's going to look like. Uncertain to a certain extent in terms of financials, what it will look like in terms of bringing all the employees back and what impact that will have to the budget. So our intent is to, over the next couple of months, get a better picture of what that looks like and communicate that out through General Manager Johnson.
Fantastic, thank you. I don't see anything else in the chat, so let's go ahead and jump into a bit of a recap on Reimagine and where we are in the process. So first, I want to welcome, we have several new advisory committee members. And I know several of us have, most of us were together pre-pandemic in person and having meetings. So I want, and had an opportunity to get to know each other a little bit before we had to move into this pandemic virtual world. But I do want to give a moment to welcome and thank this group of people for joining us. So Antoine Anderson and Walter Palmgren have joined us from the RTD Transit Union. Thank you both for being here. Claire Levy joins us. She's a Boulder County Commissioner. Angie, I'm sorry if I'm going to get your last name wrong here, Angie Badola, Thornton City Councilor. Kay Kelly with the CDOT Chief of the Office of Innovative Mobility. Steve Odoricio, Adams County Commissioner. Jennifer Hoffman, City of Broomfield. We also have 3 new RTD board members, Vince Buzak, Bobby Dishel, and Eric Davidson. And you just heard from Doug McLeod, RTD's interim CFO. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for your time and joining us. In addition to our new advisory committee members, I did also want to introduce a new team member, which on the FHU side is Amy Ford. She was actually part of the technical working group over the last year and has joined our firm. So we're very happy to have her on board, and she'll be helping with today's meeting. All right, so let's dive in. And this piece is really a quick update to make sure that we all remember what we did during the first year of work and what we're going to be doing during this next year together and what we're trying to accomplish. So first off, to remember that the Reimagine RTD is really it's a 2-year process, that we've had a pause in the middle. And there's 2 primary deliverables. The first is the system optimization plan. This is what we worked on over the first year. And this was an evaluation, a detailed evaluation of all the services that everybody that RTD provides. And it's looking to really redesign the services to balance the mobility needs and the fiscal limitations. And some of the recommendations that came out of that system optimization plan that we worked on for that first year were implemented in RTD's January 2021 run board. Now, the second piece of work is the mobility plan for the future. This is where we're going to focus on for the next year. And this is an opportunity to identify those longer term strategies between now and 2050 to address the region's future mobility needs. This is important. It's important that we think out, but we also realize from some, especially from some dialogue we had yesterday with the technical working group, that we need to think big, and we will look out to the future, but that we need to have some practical and implementable actions that we're taking right now to get us pointed in the right direction, and to help RTD recover from this pandemic period. So the bubble diagram is the top light blue bubbles are the activities that took place over the first year of work during the system optimization plan. The darker blue bubbles are the pieces of Reimagine RTD that will take place as part of the mobility plan for the future. And then the gray bubbles are other related initiatives that we are taking into account and will influence Reimagine RTD as we move through the process. So you see there's a lot of activity to occur during this piece of work. A bit of a recap on what occurred during that first year, just so everybody knows what occurred during that first year of work. For some of you that were involved, you were in it with us and helped pull a lot of this information together and reviewed it. But for those of you who weren't, there was a sizable deliverable that went to RTD called the Comprehensive Assessment of RTD Services. This is a detailed analysis of and compilation of RTD performance metrics. It's a route by route level evaluation. It looks at travel patterns. It included a very detailed evaluation of 6 peer transit agencies to compare how they operate and some of their measures of effectiveness to RTDs. Some of the key findings that came out of that: local bus routes are the most productive, and we can see that is part of how we're seeing that those routes are retaining ridership. Growth in boardings has not kept up with our regional population growth. So as a lot of people have moved to our region and to the metropolitan area, RTD has not been able to capture ridership at that same rate of growth. Generally, there are more boardings per revenue hour than our peers, but we have a higher cost per revenue hour than our peers. So just some interesting takeaways from that piece. One of the other really terrific bits of information not a bit of information, actually, it was a huge amount of information that we had, was what we referred to as the location-based services data. So this is data that we received, that we bought for RTD to look at trip patterns. They were from 2018. It's 50 million trip events were included in this database. They come from apps that run in the back of your phone, tracking your location. It was used to inform both the comprehensive assessment of services as well as in developing the system optimization plan. And it really helps us understand where are people moving to and from, the time of day that they're moving, and then the travel purpose. Why are they going? Are they moving because they're going to work? Are they going shopping? That sort of thing. So we used a lot of that information to really understand. One of the areas that we focused on was to really understand travel by equity populations and ensuring that we had a system in place that accommodated effectively equity populations moving to where they needed to go. So it was really digging into where that travel is actually, where they want to go and what is happening on our system today. Are they able to do that effectively on transit? And made some modifications and recommendations in the system optimization plan to better support their travel needs. One of the other activities that occurred in 2020 was a statistically valid community survey that surveyed both customers and non-customers. It was, and Katie, jump in here if I get any of these wrong, but it included about 1,000 participants. We asked people to consider themselves riders if they used RTD service at any time during 2019 or 2020. What we found is that about 25% of those that identified as riders said that they used the service at least a few times a week. So I think that was pre-COVID. They used it for recreational activities, getting to restaurants and bars, and of course, commuting to work. One of the really interesting takeaways I felt from from this survey, people were specifically asked if they were interested in RTD acting as an integrator of services or a full provider of services. And when we asked them about full provider, it was that RTD owns and operates bike share and scooter rentals and car share and ride hailing. And participants leaned more towards RTD being the full service provider that would have those services in-house. So they wanted to see RTD do all of that. So I think for this effort, as we think about the mobility plan for the future, that's one for us to keep in mind. So the next items that happened as we went through the process, of course, we went on a pause in August of 2020. And I think you're all aware that we went on a pause to allow the board of directors and RTD to find their general manager and CEO. And of course, now they have General Manager Johnson on board, which is terrific. And then they were in the midst of doing some January 2021 service changes that were really responding to COVID. They were responding to the new travel patterns, and they were responding to the impact to the budget that had occurred during that time. And then the accountability committee was also being initiated, and there was an opportunity to pause to allow for some information to come in from the accountability committee, so it could also be taken into account during the second part of the Reimagine process. So I think we've made it through those reasons for a pause, and this is a good opportunity for us to restart the process, make sure that we have a really solid plan in place that helps guide RTD as we come out of COVID and start to hopefully come back to our offices and come back together and get back to some of those travel patterns that we saw pre-pandemic, so that we can start to we can help rebuild RTD in a very positive and constructive manner for our community. So I'll pause here. I do want to, well, actually, let me go through just the next couple of slides, and then we'll pause for some more questions. The system optimization plan. So one of the things that happened during, we have our technical working group happens on the Wednesday afternoons before you all. And one of the things that came up as we went through that, the technical working group said, okay, well, we worked on this system optimization plan for a year, and we know you sent it to RTD. So where does it stand? Where does it stand now? And how are we going to use that information moving forward? I think this is a really great point. I think some of the information, we did a lot of evaluation. There's a lot of great things that can be taken from that. Some of them have already been put in place as part of the January 2021 run board. But there are also things that, because some of it was based on 2018 travel patterns, and we have different travel patterns coming out of COVID, they need to be relooked at. So Brian, do you want to jump in and give a bit of information on how RTD is handling moving forward with the system optimization plan?
Sure. Thanks, Holly. This is Brian Welch, and Advisory Committee, welcome back, or if you're new to our group, welcome aboard. We found out yesterday with the technical working group that people do have questions. Hey, what's happened with the system optimization plan? So let me just take a minute and let you know, we did do a tremendous amount of work with you last year to come up with what I'll call the 2020 system optimization plan, which during the summer, as you might recall, morphed into the January 2021 run board. While we had the best intentions of working with you to identify what would look like 90 to 92% of our revenue hours and how we would do a top to bottom reevaluation and re-envision and take a look at RTD services, it quickly became an exercise where we needed to identify with you how we could allocate 60% of our service. So where are we headed now? Well, what we're going to do this year is, and this is something that's in progress, so we can't give you certainty, but we can provide more clarity, and that's what I'd like to do. We're going to work with the board of directors, the general manager, service development, and with the help of our consultant team and some funding from Dr. Cog, take a look at how agencies across the United States that are our peers and others are approaching dealing with service post-pandemic. And I don't know what that means, and I don't think anybody knows for sure, but here's what we're going to do. We will be coming up with strategies that will constitute what we're going to call the 2021 System Optimization Plan. It will still be predicated on all of the underlying principles that we worked with you on last year. It will still have fiscal constraints, of course, but now we've got the added complexities of social distancing, teleworking, and other things that we'll get into a little bit more later, even in this meeting. So stay tuned. At the next session, when we get together with you, we are going to provide more clarity for you after we've gotten better direction on how we want to approach this with our board and with our general manager. So there will be a role for you to see how we can accomplish what we will call the way forward for RTD in the next, say, 2 to 6 years with our service, which will still differentiate us from the mobility plan for the future. I hope that provides a little bit more clarity for you, but I'll hand it back to Holly.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you so much, Brian. One of the things that RTD has been doing is conducting some listening sessions in support of, I think this is just something that we heard from the technical working group and the advisory committee during that first year is we need better coordination before you come out and make changes to the services with the local agencies. And so RTD has taken some action on that right away. They are conducting some listening sessions. And before they go into this next round of modifications to services, they were able to, if you want to go to the next one, Matthew, they have conducted 10 meetings between January 28th and February 22nd. And they've been able to go out to 5 geographic sectors. They've heard from about 154 attendees. So they've been getting some good feedback. And this next slide provides some of the feedback that they have, that they've heard as they've gone out to ask people for some input. So we'll pause there. John, I see you have a hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question for Brian. So I understand that you're going to be following metrics to help bring back certain amounts of service. I just interested to know what your plan is for evaluating services that were cut, because obviously you're not going to be able to say, oh, you know, services or ridership's increasing because there's no service there. So if you give us a sense of how you plan to approach that, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, thank you for that question, John. The approach is under development, and I would anticipate that the way that the board is going to make those kinds of considerations will be predicated on different types of financial and other metrics that we can take a look at that are in fact trackable. We're in a situation where, as a transit agency, and this is the case for all of us across the United States, we don't have a lot of projections or forecasts or timelines that we can work with and extrapolate from. So you can anticipate that the board will be considering a combination of existing ridership, social distancing requirements that are either changed or modified, the financial situation of the district, and perhaps some other factors as well that they wish to consider. And I would anticipate, John, that that's the method that it will be used, and it'll be probably different than previous run boards where we strictly apply our service standards. There certainly needs to be a different approach. I know that doesn't give much more certainty, but I hope that provides just a little bit more clarity on how those factors may be considered.
So just a little bit of input, and that would be I'm giving, in my mind, I'm thinking of the GS, for example, just to follow, if you would, traffic counts on 93, and then maybe also reaching out to the businesses at either end of that corridor, just to get a sense of, well, what do they anticipate in terms of bringing folks back to work? So just a couple of.
That's a good, yeah, thank you, John, for mentioning that. We will be engaging with obviously a lot of the key determinants of our ridership, and that means monitoring what's going on with key employers throughout the region, regularly checking in with them and finding out, for, as General Manager Johnson mentioned, what are the big institutions that we have a lot of ridership relationship with doing right now? What are their plans? it's difficult, obviously, for them to forecast that. But if we can stay in touch with them contemporaneously and say, hey, you know, Charles Schwab, we're going to bring back this many thousand employees or something. Those are the kind of things that would be very helpful for us as we move forward.
So this is Deborah Johnson. If I can jump in and just add a little more clarity on the approach going forward, recognizing that it's paramount that we do really listen and have a better understanding of what's happening within our service district. One thing that I am doing in conjunction with the board is planning futuristically as we look and determine what our North Star is, and that's creating alignment around strategic priorities. And those priorities will help, you know, provide the basic foundation upon which we can make informed decisions, recognizing what Holly addressed relative to these listening sessions. While this may be the jump off point with this upcoming service change, what I endeavor to do is make this a continuous feedback loop. So we will be out in the community constantly and engaging more with the various businesses. But then again, as we talked about, looking at what's happening at activity centers, recognizing that there is a myriad of our customer segment that are utilizing transit to get to their employment sites, recognizing that the models may change relative to the impacts from the pandemic with the telecommuting and remote working. We have to ensure that we're flexible and agile, and that partnership will be paramount. More so looking holistically at what our fare structure is as we go forward. That's part and parcel of trying to entice people to want to utilize the system as well. So there's a myriad of different tactics that are being examined, and I like to qualify this aspect of what we're doing futuristically as the road to recovery, recognizing that we have to use the design thinking approach, identifying what our customer pain points are, because we have to be able to empathize with that aspect and then define the problem of which we're solving. And that will help us then ideate with all of you to discern what it is. But more specifically, I think what is paramount is going to where the people are relative to key activity centers and asking this population, why aren't you utilizing transit? Because that's the one missing piece as well, holistically, as we look to leverage different services as we look at our road to recovery. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you so much. I do want, in the chat, Dea had a question about RTD supporting vaccination. I have to scroll up here. Wondering what efforts RTD may be doing to support COVID vaccination distribution.
I'll take that.
Wonderful.
So basically, RTD has been working in conjunction with CDPHE, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and other entities as we go forward, recognizing what is it that we can do to support ensuring that vast people can access vaccination sites. So most recently, we partnered with SCL Health at the National Western Complex in February and in March 6th, whereby there were 5,000 people who received the first shots in February. And then subsequently, those individuals received shots. We transported those people, and I'd like to commend our frontline operators who basically were shuttling people to and fro. Additionally, we partnered with Stride Health and provided the access of our Lakewood Wadsworth park and ride lot or parking garage to be utilized for vaccinations as well. And currently recognizing that with vast majorities of the population, when you have your vaccination shot, you have to be observed. We are leveraging and worked with the Federal Transit Administration to basically get permission per se to utilize paratransit to get that demographic to transport those individuals to get vaccinations, recognizing the way paratransit works. We would normally take someone, drop them off, but we have received we've received permission per se from the FTA to actually wait there at the site. Additionally, as it relates to our employees, we're working with Kaiser. You don't have to be a Kaiser member, whereby we're ensuring that our employees being categorized in the 1B for category. We're looking at the week of March 22nd to make that readily available. Again, I personally contacted FTA to see if we could transport employees. And the caveat with that, as long as we're not encroaching upon our normal service delivery going forward. And we're also working on having a site at our facility for vaccinations, but there's a lot of nuances attributable to that, ensuring that there's capability to, have the freezers, for the vaccines and things of the like. So this has been an ongoing process, and I have been talking to CCDC as well, and we're trying to figure out, because there's not one clear funnel in relationship to how to do this, but RTD is open and amenable to being partners in this. So if anybody has, a need, we are willing and able to lean in to the conversation to see where we might be able to provide services to get people to where they need to go to get a vaccination. Thanks.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I see, Kate, that you have a hand raised, and I apologize if I'm not going in order. I'm trying to, but jump
I think
in if I
was
miss you.
accidental. Sorry about that.
Hi, me?
Please, yes, Kate.
Okay, I just want to point out that we ought to be considering that there is a move afoot to require employers to have a certain amount of their employees stop driving to work. I believe that Dr. Cog and the TMAs are working on that, and that is something that this group ought to take into consideration when doing their work. Thanks.
Yes, and we should get those people on the bus.
That's right.
Go get them on the bus. All right, wonderful. Thank you all. Okay, let's dive into, next we're going to talk a bit about guiding principles. So RTD has put together a set of guiding principles. We've used this term, I will just caution, in the past. This is more the traditional guiding principles, and is really a focus on value statements that help to guide decision making. And these are important for us because they are the foundation for RTD's, foundation for decisions on RTD's service delivery as we move forward. And they will help us set the framework for the mobility plan for the future. So we want to get a review of these and just have some dialogue around these as well. So the next slide shows how generally guiding principles fit within. Matthew, can you forward us one? Thank you. This slide shows how guiding principles fit within a traditional planning framework. So we have guiding principles. These are our value statements that we make. Then we usually have objectives that are related to our guiding principles, and we have very specific strategies that come out that help us to accomplish what we're trying to achieve. So we sent you a survey and we asked for input on specific strategies that you'd like RTD to consider. And we're going to spend much of our time together today talking about both the strategies that we heard from you and then soliciting more strategies as well. So as an example, here we've talked about upgrading all stops and stations to meet ADA requirements. And this type of a strategy would certainly be in support of an equity guiding principle as well as a mobility guiding principle. So let's dive in and take a quick review of the guiding principles. These principles were presented to the board of directors in February, and our hope is to have them adopted in early April. I know we've got several board members on, so they can give feedback, but it seemed like they were well received by the board. So we've got 6 here, starting with mobility. Of course, one of our core guiding principles that we're providing safe and reliable transportation. And this is with the intent of improving the quality of life for our residents, customers, and visitors. Equity is the second one. One also a core value for RTD is to remove barriers for people who may have barriers to moving around and their mobility. RTD is looking to remove those barriers to ensure that customers have freedom to get where they want to go. From a financial perspective, RTD is looking to leverage resources and maximize efficiencies And I think the fundamental thing here is to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And they have a responsibility to make sure that they are evaluating how their use of the resources that come in through the taxpayers. Partnerships, we heard this loud and clear through our first year of work with the technical working group, as well as with you all on the advisory committee, that partnerships are very important, both to making sure that we're looking at the local services that are provided, that we're being innovative, and that we're using those opportunities to enhance mobility throughout the district. Workforce, of course, we don't have much to offer if we don't have the workforce in hand and happy and engaged in the work that they do. So making sure that we are, as an agency, RTD is fostering a dynamic, diverse workforce that promotes engagement and innovation. And then sustainability, making sure that RTD, as they always do, provides sustainable mobility options, but that while they're always doing that, they're always they're looking to identify and reduce opportunities to reduce that environmental impact. So those are the 6 guiding principles, and I'll open it up here to any questions or dialogue that we have.
Hello, this is Walter Palmgren from the ATU Light Rail Operations.
Great, thank you, Walter. Go ahead.
I had 2 things that I wanted to mention as part of the discussion, and as we want to move forward to try to make things better and get RTD back to the potential it has and make it the agency it once was. Oftentimes, one of the issues with changes is the impact to the employees is not the of consideration, and people make changes to schedules and routings and what have you, excuse me, and they don't look at what the long-term impact to the people doing the work really is. So as we move forward in getting RTD back in more of a full swing of operations, I really must stress and encourage everyone to take into account not just what we are providing to the public, but also the impact to the employees that are doing the services, to ensure that everything is built and designed so that we balance between the services we're providing and ensuring that how we're providing those services is not going to be a detrimental impact to the employees as it has been in the past.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Walter. That is, I think, alluding to perhaps the mandating that was occurring and had been occurring for quite a period of time, and some other impacts. One thing I did want to mention that I forgot to mention here, given that we may have some ideas around workforce strategies, our intent is to reach out to RTD staff directly to get some feedback on what might help with this 5th guiding principle. So I absolutely, and Walter, of course, you have great insights on that. But I do want to assure you that we'll be getting feedback directly from RTD, staff, which I think will be very helpful in supporting strategies around workforce. It's a little hard for us to do on the outside of the organization.
Very good. And yes, mandating was definitely half of the thought that I had behind what I said. The other part of the equation is the lack of proper respite time. I believe the state auditor's report that recently came out even cited that as being a concern. Operators, especially on the rail operations side, our schedules are not planned around the time it takes to actually get a train prepared for the next in-service trip and having sufficient time for a respite period so that operators can be able to use the restroom, eat, drink, stretch, just be human in between each trip, especially for some of our longer trips that are an hour, 40 minutes plus each trip. So, that is the other half of where I was going with what I said.
Super.
The second point that I wanted to bring up, is a concern. There is significant concern from operators, the frontline transit employees that are providing the services, that as RTD continues to build these partnerships with private organizations, Lyft, Uber, taxis, what have you, that it's actually a form of outsourcing the work that belongs to the union workers. And as more services are privatized, that is less work that's being available for the frontline transit workers, the RTD employees.
Those are great points. Thank you so much, Walter. Jill?
Good morning, Jill Ocontore from the Denver Streets Partnership. I feel like the guiding principles could benefit from a little bit more specificity in how they're written, and I understand some of that may come through the objectives and the strategies, but just a couple examples like sustainability, providing sustainable mobility options. Those options don't matter a whole lot if people aren't actually using them. So I think it needs to talk about shifting people from unsustainable modes to sustainable modes. So i.e. increasing transit ridership, decreasing SOV mode share would be more to the point of how RTD could be supporting sustainability. And similarly with equity, I think it should be not just about removing barriers, but it should be addressing inequities that have been created by past systemic policy decisions, by prioritizing, the communities that suffered from those inequities, communities of color, low-income communities. I feel like without that lack of specificity, these guiding principles are a little vague and could be interpreted in a lot of different ways.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Jill. I thought I saw another hand up. Let me see here.
Dea.
Dea, did you have a hand up?
Yes. I just want to echo Jill's comments. I was going to make a very similar comment that we need to be a little bit more explicit in some of these guiding principles. I'd also just recommend, in terms of mobility, I mean, safe and reliable is certainly fantastic, but in terms of getting more folks onto public transportation, we also need fast transportation. We need it to be an incentive to get folks out of their single occupancy vehicles and into public transportation system. The other question that I have isn't just thinking through some of the recommendations that the RTD Accountability Committee is making and how these two, for example, the guiding principles and the accountability are starting to align, and kind of what you all might be seeing as that opportunity for the two conversations to merge or to at least support one another.
Yeah, I think absolutely our intent is to make sure that we know what's going on with the accountability committee and weave in what is appropriate. I think we're waiting until we get a final word, the final recommendations that go, I believe, to the board in a couple of months. Do I have that right?
That is correct.
That is correct. Go ahead, Deborah, please. Thank you.
No, I said that is correct, Holly, as it relates to the recommendations, because quite naturally, as we look at Reimagine RTD, this is the core business element of the Regional Transportation District, and recognize the critical work that the Accountability Committee is doing. There's intersectionality, but recognizing that this is part and parcel of enhancing or optimizing a transportation network. This is going forward in the manner in which we have described, and the accountability aspects will be additional in reference to maximizing what it is when we look at the overarching transit delivery.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you. Katie, do we have any others? Otherwise, I'm going to, and feel free to send us other other comments and questions, in the chat or by email later. We're happy to take it however, whatever's.
Holly, I just wanted to jump in and Michael Miera made a note about, and this is, I believe, related to workforce, just wanted to highlight this, that taking into account the health and well-being being integrated into that workforce guiding principle, which I think is a great point. And then there was one additional follow-up related to the vaccines from Ron Short. And Ron, do you want to jump in and explain a little bit what your comment is here or question?
Yes, thank you. My concern is going forward that, we as an agency have been making ourselves available to assist the community in this process. But my concern is all along our frontline workers have been out servicing the public without fail. And I think there should be more of an urgency for the vaccine to be made available to them. Because if you feel some kind of a way, when you're taking all these people to get the vaccine and it's not available to you. So that's a real concern of mine.
So Ron, if I can jump in, thank you so much for that. And as you know, that has been a major priority of mine. And what I was alluding to is trying to work in earnest, recognizing that this is a major priority for us, trying to ensure we're getting in the queue, and that communique that was disseminated yesterday from me speaks to that, and it's in the works, and I'm hoping we'll have that solidified in quick order. So thank you so much for your comments. Appreciate that.
Fantastic, thank you. Anything else, Katie? Okay. All right, well, let's jump into the meat of the meeting today, where we're going to ask for some feedback from you all. Before we dive into the specific strategies, I do want to introduce a couple of new team members that we have added, that you'll see through this as we develop the mobility plan for the future. So Michael Flynn, today we're joined by Michael Flynn, and I think Kate Sargent is out there, of Sam Schwartz. They are a New York City-based transportation firm. We have been at FHU, we've been a big fan of the firm since reading their founder's book called Street Smart. And it's really, it really makes us take a critical look at our transportation system, brings innovative ideas about how we move people more safely and efficiently and equitably. So we're very happy to have them participate in the mobility plan for the future, and they'll really be helping FHU lead this effort up. So Mike, if you're out there, do you want to give a quick introduction?
Sure, thanks, Holly. Yeah, it's nice to meet everybody, maybe in person someday. So as Holly mentioned, Sam Schwartz we're a New York-based firm, but we have offices across the country and have actually collaborated with both the city and RTD on a few projects in the last few years. I help lead our planning work as well as leading our strategic planning. And I think that's something we'll hopefully be bringing to this effort, is the work we've done with a range of cities and transit agencies around the country on kind of articulating, their vision for the future and turning it into an action plan. Kate?
Hi, I'm Kate Sargent. I'll be working with Mike Flynn for Sam Schwartz on this effort, and I'm the Oakland office leader for Sam Schwartz, and also bring background in transit planning, emerging mobility, and transit electrification. Looking forward to working with all of you.
Yes, we're so happy to have you on the team and get some perspective from across the nation and across the world, of course. So everybody knows, other partners that you'll start to see during this effort are Panasonic will be, representatives from Panasonic will also be joining us, so we can start to talk about those big, bold things that Panasonic is up to. And Walker Parking as well, that will help us with some of those parking and policy issues that are likely to rise to the surface as well. I think this group of people is going to be, and firms, is going to be a great resource pool for getting RTD future ready and making a great and sustainable plan to help guide RTD into the next several years. So our goal with the mobility, our expectations, we call them our future mobility plan for the future expectations, and what we're trying to achieve as we go through this process. Probably first and foremost here is to advance dialogue and support community partnerships to help restore some of that trust. It's been, we heard loud and clear through our first year of work that there is a real need to have consistent and candid dialogue occurring between RTD and this process and the agencies, the communities, cities within the RTD district. We're going to prepare for evolving travel patterns and travel demand, including COVID. And what does it look like? What does our community travel and travel pattern look like now that we've been through COVID and are hopefully coming out of COVID in some manner? But our travel patterns, we know, changed dramatically as we went into the pandemic. And there's a lot of dialogue around what it will look like as we come out. Do we go back to doing what we were doing before? Or do we have a change that is more persistent over time? We're going to identify opportunities to integrate emerging and future technologies with the support of RTD and the communities and the mobility of the communities. Prepare fiscally constrained and needs-based plans, and then implementation recommendations, including performance measures to monitor how RTD is doing in achieving these goals over time. So this diagram illustrates the workflow that we'll be taking as part of, as we develop the mobility plan for the future. So of course, we've talked today about the guiding principles. This is our first stop in along the way. And we need to get those set up because they really, as we talked about, help set the framework for the mobility plan for the future and for RTD's decision-making. We're also throughout the process talking with customers and stakeholders, and we'll be doing that continually. And Julie Skeen with CIG will be giving us more information about that towards the end of the meeting and our plan for doing some more direct outreach with our customers and stakeholders. Then we're going to be doing a market and travel demand analysis. And Michelle Bina with Cambridge Systematics is with us today, and she's going to give us a bit of information on the modeling that's taking place, really to help us understand. We know there's a potential for our travel patterns are changed right now from what they were. We know there's a chance that they're not going back to what they were. So helping us understand what those might look like and how do they impact what RTD's response should be. So, so she's going to give us some information on that. And we're going to just start that dialogue just a little tiny bit today. And then what we're going to focus on today and as we move through the whole process is developing strategies that respond to those travel demand, the travel demand and market changes and the demand that we have in the communities, and making sure we're doing that efficiently. And then of course, there's the financial piece. We have to figure out what RTD can actually afford to do in a near term and what they might have to put on a longer term horizon, put some prioritization to that. And that all leads up to the mobility plan for the future, which ultimately is a set of, it's a framework of policies and partnerships, investment strategies that make up that mobility plan for the future to guide RTD forward. So we're going to be doing all of that good work over the next year with all of you, and we're hoping that you all will stay engaged. We've planned meetings every other month. We're hoping that you will review and have input on the analysis and findings, help us craft the recommendations, and then very importantly, we're hoping you'll serve as community liaisons to help us get the word out about the recommendations and strategies that are coming out of this process, and help us build consensus around the recommendations that ultimately make up the mobility plan for the future. And our intent is to deliver this plan to the RTD board in December of 2021 of this year. All right, now we talked about just setting the stage very slightly on the travel demand forecasting. So Michelle, if you're out there, can you give us just a very high level overview of what you're looking at to understand travel near and long term?
Sure. So about this time last year, maybe our concerns with future mobility might have been a bit more focused on potential disruptors, like CAVs or connected autonomous vehicles. And in the past 5 to 10 years, we've certainly seen how fast technological advancements have changed the mobility landscape, and that's kind of been a concern. as far as competing with or complementing transit. Today, we see that the pandemic has dramatically changed our everyday travel patterns. We don't know how much our travel patterns will rebound or by when, but we can't ignore the shift that's happened and the potential for long-term lasting impacts. So there are all sorts of uncertainties in our future that are very apparent, especially during this pandemic, that we should be considering. Some examples of those are on the screen right now. And a few years ago, we certainly couldn't have predicted a pandemic, but we definitely could have looked at changes in telecommuting rates and how that would impact ridership. So it's important to look at these different uncertainties and possibilities without necessarily pinpointing what's going to cause them, in order to consider like how RTD might respond.
That's super. Thanks, Michelle. So this slide is less engaging. It just says scenario planning, but the intent here is I want to just set up for you as we move into talking about strategies. And we're going to be talking about those strategies and evaluating those strategies for the next several months together. Next time we're together, our goal is to work through what I think is very engaging scenario planning process. And I know we use the term scenario for a variety of things, but this is actually a very specific method and process that you go through to develop and evaluate scenarios. And to Michelle's point, to help you understand some of those unknowns a little bit more. So the process really helps us challenge our assumptions about the future, and then it helps to uncover blind spots. So Michelle talked about we might not have been able to predict a pandemic, but I'll tell you the first time I did this particular scenario planning process was about 5 years ago. And one of the things that came out of it was to prepare for a worldwide pandemic. So I have a lot of faith that this process can uncover some blind spots and can be a very effective tool for you to think about a changing industry and come up with effective tools to make sure that you're sustainable and resilient as you move forward. One of the things that comes up with that, as Michelle talked about, is to better understand and imagine those disruptive and emerging technologies. And then from that, what we're trying to do is identify common strategies and future investments that are advantageous to RTD and for our residents and customers throughout the community. Oops, sorry, did we have a comment? Sorry, I thought I heard someone.
Somebody just was off for a second.
Okay. So the strategies, if you were able to provide strategies in the SurveyMonkey, those strategies, along with the strategies that we're going to talk about today, and strategies that are coming from our great teaming partners of Sam Schwartz and Panasonic, they're all going to come into a pool for you of potential strategies that you might use as we go through the scenario planning process. And then, of course, next time we're together, you can come up with even more strategies that you think might be responsive and be supportive of RTD moving forward. So with that, let's go ahead and move into the exercise where what we're hoping to do here is get some more ideas from you on strategies that RTD should be considering as we are putting together this mobility plan for the future. So thinking about very broadly those categories that we put together for the guiding principles, and to Jill's point and Dea's point, if being more specific on those guiding principles helps, absolutely put that in your mind and have some of those specific actions and strategies that we should be considering. Think about those and put those in the chat box. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend about 5 minutes on each guiding principle. And I'm going to ask you to put strategies in the chat box with a consideration for, are there things like using equity as an example? Is there a strategy around equity when you're thinking of parking and land use as an example? A strategy that RTD should consider to better support equity? Could they better support equity populations by redeveloping their parking areas into transit supportive development with with affordable housing component, for example. So that could be a strategy that you would put in the chat box. And then we're just, if possible, I'd love for each of you to put a strategy in for each of the guiding principles, but make sure that you're thinking about the specific strategy areas that we have at the bottom. Parking and land use. Is there something we could do with the fleet to better support equity? Is there something we can do with infrastructure and access? What about service and operations? Technologies, are there technologies we should be considering to better support equity? So we'll start with equity, then we'll work through financial sustainability and the rest of the guiding principles. So are there questions about that? I think as we get rolling, it will become more obvious what we're trying to get to, and we'll just dialogue about the ideas as well. So let's start with equity. Go ahead and type in the chat box your ideas or your strategies that RTD should be considering to support equity and this guiding principle around equity with an eye towards parking, fleet, infrastructure, operations, and technology. Oh, yes. Katie, do you want to, I forgot to do this yesterday as well. Katie, do you want to give us an overview of the strategies that came in? And that might also get some ideas flowing.
Yeah, definitely.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Katie Dawson with FHU. Just kind of while you're getting the juices flowing, we had sent out the survey to everybody to have an opportunity to identify some strategies, as well as associating, is it a midterm goal or a long-term goal? And just wanted to kind of give you guys an update about that. The survey is going to remain open after our meeting today and after our kind of brainstorming session. So you'll be able to go back and add additional information. But wanted to just give a brief highlight about what we heard and kind of what we got back from you all. So we got, I don't know, about 40 or 50 strategies, and we'll be adding to that today. But I wanted to go through kind of associated with the guiding principles and highlight a couple of examples that we've heard from each. So equity, one of them that we heard was upgrading all stops and stations and, you know, the access to those stops and stations to make them ADA compliant. Creating partnerships, ensuring working and getting people to social services, perhaps with free service. In terms of financial, there were a couple of ideas related to reevaluating the funding structure for regional transit service, kind of how RTD is funded, as well as identifying and implementing new value capture strategies for major capital projects. So looking at fixed guideway, BRT, rail station development. Sustainability, there was a consensus in the strategies that we did receive. They were all focused on electrification or moving the fleet to zero emission vehicles, and also the identification of having subcontractors do this as well. So hopefully when we get to this one, we'll think outside of the box on sustainability and get some more ideas. In terms of workforce, there was a comment about investing in a diverse workforce of transit ambassadors. So creating a nice environment for the customer experience, mental health, social work, things that RTD is kind of moving towards. And I will highlight again what Holly mentioned, is that we will be going and implementing kind of a stakeholder and public engagement process. And hopefully we'll get a lot of input as well from, you know, the frontline internal staff to understand workforce needs and vision and what that should look like in the future. In terms of partnerships, again, looking at, there was some ideas about working with venture companies to really identify the future of transportation, with the intention that it would position RTD as the place to experiment with emerging technology. So really kind of getting RTD on the forefront. Partnerships, there was also an educational component of really working with different partners to help, you know, promote and create a culture of public transit use. I think post-pandemic especially, we're going to need to be thinking through that. And developing a robust MOS implementation roadmap. So again, kind of looking at those different partners and opportunities. And then of course, mobility, this is where the majority of all of the strategies came in. Of course, that, you know, encompasses most everything RTD does. Kind of the core premise of RTD's operation is getting people to and fro. And some common themes that came out of that, there was a lot of interest in first and last mile connectivity, especially connecting with micromobility, as well as really looking at investment in a robust BRT system and looking at the infrastructure improvements related to that. I think gets to the point of what I think Dea was saying. We need to move people quickly. We need to make it efficient in a competitive mode of travel. And then another one that came up was looking at a different, reduced fares or different fare structures. So that's just kind of a quick highlight of what we heard, and I will toss it back to Holly for the exercise.
Fantastic. And we've got some great ideas coming in on the chat already. Let's see. Dea, I think that you and Kathleen both had some ideas around fares and the fare structure. Do you want to jump in and talk about that a little?
Sure. I think this is just this is a frequently mentioned concern, and even on the RTD Accountability Committee, just thinking through how do we simplify the fare structure in a way that, to use General Manager Johnson's words, really centers the end user, which is the rider, the customer, but also the operator. At this point, it is very confusing to use the RTD system. There's lots of fares that are potentially available. And I can just imagine from a consumer perspective, it could be perceived as very challenging. So whether it's offering a flat fare or even just simplifying all of the discounted fare programs into just one discount, I think that would be easier, or at least something worth pursuing. I think the other opportunity for us to explore that we were able to do during COVID is almost piloting these quick projects to just see what would it look like for us to potentially offer free fare, which I know RTD is currently doing, or was doing, I think, at one point on the end line. How do we just pilot and just test what free fares or significantly reduced fares along a specific line would look like, to just give us a sense of whether it might be feasible for the long term, and then how do we actually do this in a more sustainable way.
That's great. You also had a comment about the institutions and working with the institution of funding, which I think was, if everybody's following in the chat, I think that's a great partnerships, also following equity and partnerships really there. Let's just see, Katie.
With that, yeah, as we're looking, John Terre and Michael Miera, you both talked about sort of partnerships that RTD could have in land development, specifically related to affordable housing and denser development around transit stops. And I was wondering, Michael and John, if you could talk a little bit about that and what you're seeing in that space and where it might move itself forward, the kinds of things that we might want to look at there.
Yeah, I'll just offer. So first of all, I just know that RTD has had a history of encouraging TOD development, but it hasn't, I think, been free to play in that space in using its available real estate to build developments within its envelope of bus stops, et cetera. So I would just suggest that that's an area where RTD could build some sort of fiscal sustainability, but also to achieve the opportunity to draw in more affordable housing access. And then in my mind, there should be some tie to investment in transit and the tie to that kind of denser development that does encourage and provide the opportunity for more affordable workforce housing. So that's what I have in mind.
Well, and obviously the steps that RTD has just taken in regards to its affordable housing policy that it was encouraging here over the last couple of weeks has certainly stepped us in that direction. But I think you're right, and sort of how the freedom of that may be on a legislative side. So it goes to the policy pieces, all of that. Right. Ulish, you mentioned you talking about increasing service, but with a focus on routes that hit into equity communities. And I wondered if you wanted to expand a little bit on that piece of it.
Yeah, sure. So, as I actually reflected in some of the information earlier around some of the main routes, specifically in Denver, that have still maintain its ridership at a higher level than other routes. Those are the same routes that actually kind of bisect our equity communities. So in Denver, we have the inverted L. And so if you were to drive that east-west line, that's the 15L and the Colfax service. And if you go north-south on the west side, that's Federal Boulevard. So it's creating ways that we can either build out the infrastructure that that has a service that has more frequency throughout the day, and really being more competitive for people driving and providing that high frequency service, not only in the morning time or peak time, but throughout the day. So that's that comment.
I appreciate that. And we know that George Teal just literally had to step out to go to E470. As I wanted to ask him about its concepts when he was talking about the sort of the applications, if you will, the technology applications to better enable people access to, I'm going to call it a mobility wallet. But actually, Danny Katz, you mentioned something a little bit similar, and I wanted to ask if you could expand on this. How to make it easier for neighborhoods to get passes that somewhat potentially could tie to technology and applications, but it also is something different, perhaps. And I wanted to see what you were thinking as you were looking at that from a neighborhood pass perspective.
Yeah, Danny Katz with Coperg. Yeah, I've just talked with a lot of people over the years who say, boy, it'd be really nice if we in a neighborhood could just come together and apply for or get passes for anyone who lives here, and you could really target that to particular areas of some of our cities and really break down a barrier or even incentivize transit if we do it well. And it could be technologically, or it could just be make it easier to get the current passes that exist.
Right. And Kathleen Brackey, you popped in on that, commenting about the cash fare elements to that. And I wondered if you wanted to expand there, because I think that we have some overlap in some of those ties potentially.
Sure. Thanks for can you hear me okay?
We can, yeah.
Great. Thanks for the chance to weigh in. One of the things that we're finding is that even though there's a lot of great past programs like Live and others, the barriers for people to access that are so challenging for them that they're not able to take advantage of those programs. And so what we're seeing is the lowest income customers are having to pay the cash fare, which is the highest fare of all to ride. And so if it were possible to either have free fares or a low cash fare, like $1 a ride, something like that, to help overcome those barriers. And again, we're trying to incentivize people to come back to transit and to grow transit ridership. So making it easy and affordable and attractive and incentivizing people to ride would help tremendously, along with the other strategies that people are mentioning around increasing service frequency and quality and all of those things. So it's meant to be a complementary solution along with other ideas. So thanks for the chance to weigh in.
Yes. Okay, that's great. I want to make sure we get through all 6 of our guiding principles. So let's move, please continue to put items in the chat, but let's go on to financial. So with an eye towards financial, let's talk about some strategies that RTD could put into place. Again, they could be policies, operating enhancements, capital investments, with these areas in mind, because these are the specific areas that Reimagine is going to try to tackle: the parking and land use, fleet, infrastructure and access, service and operations, and technology. So what can we do to support RTD? What strategies should they be considering to make sure that they are maximizing resources, making sure that we're cost effective and that we're good stewards of taxpayer dollars?
So I also wanted to point out, it looks like Michael has his hand up, and maybe while people are populating, you can chime in.
Please do.
Sure, yeah, I just wanted to echo what John had to say about affordable housing, but I'm with the Urban Land Conservancy, and we help in the development of affordable housing. And as most of you probably understand, it is very difficult and complex, and the price of land makes a big difference. So as RTD is looking at partnering with groups, if they could make sure not to try to make a profit on the land and take into consideration discounting the land it really helps make these affordable housing projects. It helps them pencil in. So just want to bring that up. The cost of land is very important.
Great point. Thank you. All right. So those financial ideas aren't rolling in. Don't be shy.
These are the tricky ones, right? How do we do all the great things we want to do, but in a budget-friendly manner?
And as we're sitting and getting into this, Bobby, obviously as an RTD board member, you're already thinking about some of this, but you comment about working with cities to include payment to RTD when developments go in. And you want to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
You can.
Oh, and now my video works too. It wasn't working earlier. I apologize for being off video. Yeah, so my day job is as a real estate attorney, and at least in the city and county of Denver, it is required when a large development goes in that you dedicate a portion of that space to open space, to Denver Public Schools, or that you pay a fee in lieu of dedicating that land. And for me, if someone is making an affirmative choice to not do transit-oriented development, RTD is still responsible for providing transit to that new densely populated development. RTD is pretty limited. As I think people know on this call, we would have to go to a vote to increase our fares. So thinking about ways that we can diversify our revenue and make sure that we are providing, as we continue to grow, the city is taking into account things like making sure we have open space, things like making sure we have money for schools, but we're not taking into account that underlying equity issue of transit and getting people to that open space, to that schools, to those social services. So that's really in that land use development sort of nitty gritty space, which is almost the non-transit oriented development, which we know occurs, but we still need to provide those people with transit services.
Appreciate that. And Dea, you also made an interesting comment about fare evasion fees. And I suspect I recognize that so much of this fee structure and the revenue side is all hand in hand together. But if you wanted to expand on that just slightly.
Yeah, I'm happy to unpack that a little bit more. I think a couple of things that come up for me are around, and I know fare evasion is not, I think, as high on the RTD, but for those that do experience fare evasion and are given a fine, we found that it's when we look at parking fees, for example, at the city level and even in parking garages, the fare evasion fee is higher than parking. And so from an equity standpoint, I'm just thinking, like, how do we make this a more equitable policy to make sure that we aren't negatively affecting folks that are already disproportionately impacted by a number of factors. So I'm happy to provide a little bit more information and data on what we were able to pull, but I think that should be something worth exploring.
Thank you. And John, you commented, and I know that Boulder, the area, has been talking a lot about this, about community funding support, and people have been looking at a lot of different options in this space, and maybe chat just a little bit more about that one as well.
Yeah, sure. And I feel like I've already appeared too much on screen here, but I will say this, that I do, as working with business leaders, when you think about local first and final mile strategies, there is a lot of interest and support for service that builds off of regional connections. If you get dropped off on a regional route and you still have 2 miles to get to work, that's not efficient transit. So partnerships from RTD in conjunction with the local government leadership, but also then going to the businesses, they recognize that there's a cost associated with the challenge they face in getting employees to get to work, and it's recruitment cost, it's just the cost of having facilities for parking. So we have already seen that they're willing to offer subsidies. They don't love it, but they certainly recognize the trade-off benefits. So something to consider.
Right.
Those are great. So keep them coming on the financial, and let's move on to sustainability. I think here, Jill, to your point earlier, some of those specifics, I think the strategies here can be very specific. So I'd love to see some of those. In addition, we have a lot around certainly electrification, or at least improving emission kind of with the fleet. And if there are other ones, I'd love to hear those as well, but I definitely think some of those specifics about mode shift would be interesting, and specific strategies we might implement here.
And folks' thoughts are coming in about sustainability and fleet. And I think that, one of the comments that was made earlier coming from some of the public side of this was, and I'll just throw this out, and Jill, it goes a little bit to your point about resisting the temptation of expensive or sexy projects and really thinking about low cost things that increase ridership. So not only are there additional bus lanes or that kind of thing, but perhaps diversifying fleet that changes the nature of that, which may fit to the sustainability side. So I toss that out, the ideas of bikes, scooter share, recognizing our cities are very involved in that process, smaller vehicles like SUVs, et cetera. And so this is some that we've heard from some others, and I push that into your thinking just to jumpstart some of the thinking also on the sustainability side as we go. Hey, Kelly, you sort of hit to that about promoting walking and biking. And I wondered if you wanted to expand on that, sort of the intersection of the infrastructure service, I guess, in addition to the transit element itself.
Sure. Just kind of thinking about how people get to transit. It's great that they're riding transit, but what are we doing to make sure that their trip to the transit stop is also low carbon, sustainable, healthy. And I think there's a lot of things that go into that with safe walking and biking routes, with good crossings, with some of the kind of safety aspects of where we're locating the stops and integrating them with amenities in communities to make sure that we're giving people an opportunity to do something other than drive to a bus stop, or skip the bus altogether because it's more efficient for them to drive.
Right. I appreciate that. And Danny, you popped back in on the infrastructure side as well. And so not just looking at the electric bus elements of it, but you talked about the infrastructure that RTD owns itself, power generation, specifically on solar and the like. Could you extend into that space a little bit, and the mobility stations, the mobility hubs, et cetera?
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of people think electric buses, and that's, I think, a big one, but RTD has so much space. I mean, you could use it in a variety of ways, putting solar panels on roofs and not just powering RTD's operations, but being a net contributor to the surrounding communities and neighborhoods, in terms of power provision, clean power. Micromobility seems like a really great opportunity here, especially around e-bikes. So more and more, we're going to see stations come up, and I would imagine RTD has the infrastructure in place, especially in rail areas, to have some electric charging infrastructure around transit stops. And then there's just so much we can do with our spaces around just making them greener, trees, all sorts of plants, and just making them, just nicer in that way.
Yeah, appreciate that. And Bobby, I know you're popping back in on a couple of elements, but Jill, I wanted to go back to you and comment a little bit about market rates for parking and talking about parking at transit stops, since I know that fits into the sustainability framework. You want to expand on that?
Sorry, I was just sipping coffee when you called me out.
Because of course, that's always the way it works, right?
And I just added to the chat, the quote from Donald Shoup, the famous parking guy, is that free parking is a fertility drug for cars. And so by providing free or underpriced parking, we're incentivizing driving, which is the exact opposite of sustainability. And so we should be charging the cost of that precious public space for people to store their private property, their vehicle in it, and or just get rid of parking at transit stops. If we have to have parking, maybe have it a couple blocks away rather than right at the transit stop.
Those are great. Any others that you wanted to flag, Amy, for conversation, or should we move on?
I think that these have been some great ones, and I think we would be remiss if we didn't sort of talk again about sort of the tie back to the financial. And I'm just going to make one comment, sort of how people are identifying the elements of the financial pieces and also promoting sustainability and the workforce pieces of it and how those fit together. So someone in another group was making a quick comment that the most effective thing that we can do still is simply to get people into shared mobility, period. And so how to effectively manage that. But maybe we can turn to the next one.
Yeah, let's do the next one. Although, Dea, I see you have a hand up. Do you want to jump in?
Yes, I just want to point out a comment that I made in the chat. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to hop off here in a second, but I want to lift up a comment that Michael brought in earlier in the conversation and around sustainability. Want to encourage us to really have this conversation at the intersection of sustainability and health outcomes as well. And this touches on some of the multimodal, but really, how do we use transportation to promote like a healthy, active living for everyone in our region? So air quality, think about how we get folks to and from the actual stops, things like that. I feel like, especially given COVID and the new context that we're in, it's really important for us to not forget that aspect of sustainability in this conversation.
That's great. Thank you so much.
And as we transition it into the workforce, I just want to highlight one more comment that Kate Kelly made about the right sizing of vehicles. So what is the right vehicle for the right route? How do we create efficiencies with that from a sustainability perspective? But then it also ties to a workforce development opportunity, which is talking about the requirement of CDL licenses, which had we been here a year or so ago, would have been a primary focus given the lack of availability of folks with CDLs. And so that I'll let Holly transition us to the next comment, but there's a transition element as we go into the workforce side.
Yes. Okay, so let's do focus on workforce. And again, I will just throw out there that this may be, I think we've had some great ones that have already come through the chat. If you have strategies around supporting that workforce and making sure that RTD is able to, have that, make sure that they're able to attract and retain great staff, because as the guiding principle says, they are RTD's greatest asset. So any strategies you have around this, but I will just point out that we will reach out to RTD staff and the workforce to get some very specific strategies that they think would be effective here as well. So, and understanding that we might not have all the answers in this group.
And Kevin, as you're jumping off, I know that you made a comment, and I just want to come to this on the workforce side about the blend between equity and parking and barriers to access and how we need to be able to make sure that we're crossing some of these strategies across the different barriers. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that if you're still on.
Yeah, I am here, and because I saw Jill's comment also, and the fact she said if low income potential riders have to drive to a transit stop or a station, it just is because we haven't built or provided enough affordable housing accessible to transit stops. But that situation still exists. It's a fact that for many folks, it might be there also that we haven't provided enough transit into those high inequity neighborhoods. So it works both ways. It's actually a complicated equation, and there's more than one variable to it.
Right.
And as I said, I do have a council meeting at 9:30, so I have to jump off.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Eric, you make a comment about workforce ambassadors, and I wanted to come to that, but then I also wanted to go all the way back to Ms. Bauer. You made a comment way back in the equity discussion about equity ambassadors, as well as even youth ambassadors. And so I'd love for you to hit on both of that. Maybe Ms. Bauer, Tammy, if you could go first, and then we can pop back into David, or excuse me, to Eric.
Thank you, Amy. It's good to see you.
You too, Tammy.
I have a lot going on here, so I had to mute everything and turn off everything, so I apologize. But yeah, I know I've seen a lot of councils or cities have had like youth and senior commissions and so forth. And that's brought a lot of energy, and and it's also a great resource. So, it's kind of like when we're trying to plan for sustainability and, in the future, we need those people to see, oh, this is a good thing, right? Now, and seniors, they have a lot of barrier thoughts. I mean, light rail, I think they're great, but the, bus transit, there's a lot of barriers. Same with the youth. So that's where I was going with that. If we just could bring them into the fold and get them to be part of our partners.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Tammy. And Eric, you were making sort of a similar comment of transit ambassadors, and I think this sort of dovetails a little bit with what Antoine was saying about sort of the operators being those same ambassadors. But if you wanted to expand on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eric Davidson, RTD. Great to be here. Yeah, I think this is a big win-win. When I think about a great place to work, it's nice to have new things to be able to do and new things to be able to move into and new skill sets. I think we have a real opportunity to expand the workforce and offer different opportunities, whether it's moving into customer experience or being trained in mental health or in social work. And I think this helps our customers, and it helps give opportunities to our workforce as well as grow the workforce over time.
Those are excellent comments. And, we're seeing a lot of folks talk about employee retentions, internship programs and the like. But Ulyss, you talk about a partnership pool just to simply increase the supply of people with CDL licenses. And you want to expand on that? I know that a lot of agencies, that we've all been involved with struggle sometimes to get CDL drivers.
Yeah. And that's the critical, I think, challenge over the next couple of years. Is that in a competitive marketplace like Denver, that CDL license is gold. And so figuring out ways that we can work to develop partnerships, whether it be with local jurisdictions and counties or even the private sector, to figure out ways to build a wider pipeline of qualified CDL drivers. So it's not so difficult to hire into the agency, would benefit the region as well as RTD. So that's that point. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Ulyss. And I think we know that all of the agencies, CDOT, RTD, City and County of Denver, do programs where they are training people and paying them to get their CDL licenses they are moving forward. But we each do that in silos in regards. So I think that's a really good point. Are there any other comments as we go along? I know, Bobby, you've weighed in on a couple of elements, and you talk about partnering with higher ed to research a transit innovation lab. You want to chat a little bit about that? Because this is about, I think, workforce training elements in regards to, let's say, educating our drivers as we start moving into more automated technologies, for instance, and support on how that works. Or so let me just ask you to expand there.
Yeah, sure. So this is it could take a variety of forms. I know at the University of Michigan, they have what they call the M-City, which is testing out different, they've partnered with Ford and a few other private companies to research and test really advanced technologies. And as a result, they've been able to capture a lot of innovation there. But an innovation lab can also look like almost an in-house consulting that is constantly looking at process improvement, design features. It's looking at really innovating on ideas to either save the agency money or different pathways to revenue or different ways we can be improving. If we're not centering innovation at the forefront and working with, we have in our backyard, University of Colorado Denver has a robust urban and regional planning school. We have no shortage of startups and well-established companies who are in robotics, who are in manufacturing. And we need to be working with them to really test out and create almost a playground for them to come and innovate and be able to put those in place in RTD. Is it whether it's something as large of a scale as the M-City design that's out in Michigan, or it's more of a smaller scale that starts with process improvement. Either way, I think it's important to really be focused on what's next, what's coming. Like when Arrivo came a few years ago, and unfortunately did not pan out, right? But it's those technologies that we want to be leading on. And it's that workforce on training on batteries, on hydrogen, on electric cars, on how to drive electric vehicles, which severely alters and can have a sizable impact on battery degradation over time as well.
All right, thank you all. We have two more strategies or two more guiding principles that I want us to get through and talk about strategies. So I'm going to move us on to the next one just to make sure, I want to make sure that we have enough time for our public engagement, and we tend to give that a short end of the stick at our meetings because we go along. So the next one here is partnerships. So same drill, just put in the chat if you have very specific ideas. I think there's been a lot of focus on both public and private partnerships that have some benefit here. But if you have some very specific ideas, we'd love to hear those as strategies for RTD to consider. We had some up above, so I know we've got some.
And as we talk about the partnerships, and I think that, Bobby, obviously you framed some of that already in some of your discussions on sort of the innovation partnership side, the technologists and others that are moving to sort of reshape things. We know that RTD is moving in a lot of these. In fact, Brian was, has been responsible for a lot of these programs, and you saw that in some of the summary discussions. But we talk a lot about the partnerships with technologists, automation, et cetera, as the future side moves forward. But Danny, you bring up a point here about just simply BRT partnerships, just the flat use of infrastructure in a slightly different way that we've all been talking about. And maybe let's expand on that just a little bit too, and how you see that moving forward.
Yeah, I think oftentimes we hear about road infrastructure projects from CDOT, but not necessarily having the committed transit operating dollars. I wonder if we could pair those things up more aggressively, such that anytime there is some sort of road infrastructure, it comes with transit operating dollars, so that we don't have to wait for some future BRT service, but it's just part of the package. I think Flatiron Flyer was a great opportunity because we already had incredible transit service there. So when we built the lane, it was filled immediately by the buses. But I think a lot of our other infrastructure, that's not always the case. So when we're outreaching for road infrastructure dollars, we should be pairing that with operating dollars for local transit, and making sure that anytime we're making any changes to a road, we're going, can we also add some space for BRT, almost like a complete streets policy, except BRT style and not just sidewalks.
And just so I make sure you're matching sort of the operations dollars with the infrastructure investment dollars on the partnership, so ensuring that they always come together. Okay.
Yeah, and so that when any new road opens, it opens with the transit instead of waiting for it later, and
right.
And potentially having that space taken up with cars instead, and not having that transit operating.
Mm-hmm. And Euless and Jamie, you guys both bring up comments here about partnerships that not only are you working with cities to supplement services that would go with existing RTD routes, and obviously our Boulder partners could weigh in on some of that as well. But Jamie, you brought up a comment about working with Excel to share on their EV development projects. Could you expand on that as well?
Yeah, there's not a lot of standards for EV development in the state. It's kind of like they're working on that. It seems like XL is the one that's taking the lead on placing charging stations, etc. So I just think it'd be nice if we kind of knew what they were doing as RTD gets into that new world.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Kathleen, you popped back in with new service models, which I think goes to some of what Euless was talking about. Maybe you two could both address some of that.
Sure. Sorry.
We have a knack of like hitting it right as you're like, sipping coffee or something. So.
Right. It's like pushing all the right buttons. So I guess what I mean by the different service delivery models is that particularly as we're trying to build back service, there may be opportunities for RTD to help co-fund local service options and partnerships with microtransit or taxi voucher program, the town of Lyons. So ways that RTD doesn't necessarily have to be the operator, but could help be a co-funding partner to help reestablish ridership. And then we could grow that into more formalized fixed route service but just and willing to come to the table to figure out these different types of models to help, again, grow ridership, grow this increment of building back and having new approaches.
And Euless, is that sort of aligned with how you were framing it?
Yeah, exactly. These are some things that we're looking at implementing here in Denver, actually this year, providing more neighborhood connections to existing RTD routes. We're actually starting with our first service in Montbello, hopefully here in the next couple of months. So just trying to expand that kind of micro transit component to hook in with the existing service. And then, of course, supporting kind of bike share, e-bikes, scooters and alike, and link them in with the existing transit stops, which we are hopefully going to be moving forward with here in the next month or so with making that connection. So any way anybody wants to get around, there should be a way to hook into the RTD system.
Those are great. All right, I think we've just got one more, but it's a big one. We've probably covered a lot of it is covered in our other guiding principles and some of our other discussion, but I would still like to spend a bit of time on strategies specific to mobility. And while I say specific to mobility, they really probably are mobility, and they probably cover some of the other guiding principles as well, but I just want to make sure we touch on this and as well, and see if there's anything else in the hopper. During yesterday's technical working group, there was a very similar comment about the infrastructure and the BRT. And the dialogue was around for all the delay that we have while the bus is out on the street, that's just using dollars in an inefficient manner. So making sure that we're accounting for those delays that are being incurred by the bus because it is in congestion, and how that influences from a financial perspective what we can be doing and what we should be doing on the ground from a capital investment perspective. So I think that's some of what was discussed on the BRT lanes here as well, which I think is a good tie together. Make buses awesome. I love that. And I like the conversation earlier about, I'm afraid I can't remember who it was. It might have been Dea, if you're still on, but the idea of being fast. Services are fast. I always think, if you're, especially, we all think our time is valuable, but especially if you're working at a job where you might be minimum wage, and that every hour of your day is so important for you to be able to make sure that you're able to get to work and make money to pay your bills. That hour of time is incredibly important and incredibly valuable. So having fast service is very important to the system and the network and a lot of the people who are riding.
And Antoine, you are talking here a little bit again about sort of the public interaction, about showing them how you provide priority to buses. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and what that means as sort of that future big idea?
Definitely. So I know as far as when it comes to the buses, in certain areas, I know that we aren't able to do the type of BRT or priority too. But as far as the connecting routes, as far as the 15 and the 0, things of that sort, priority, it's like a major thing that I've noticed with operators and also with the public. It's kind of hard to get people to ride your buses and or trains when we're sitting in the traffic that the public is sitting in. And so to see bus have priority to get people to trains and connect faster, where we're not sitting with like the public, they're 20 to 30 cars deep in traffic. They would be able to see buses actually moving faster and already 3, 4, and even 5 traffic lights ahead, getting people moving quickly throughout the Denver metro area and into these areas where service is needed.
That's terrific.
And Kay, you sort of expand on that, talking about needing to have competitive travel times in this space, and how that really works, and how you maximize that piece. And I'll just sort of toss out a few things that we've been hearing for others and the like, as you think about mobility options. And so those big ideas, if we look to 2030 or even beyond. And so I'm going to just toss out for your consideration, and as you guys continue to think about it, we talk about different fleet. We talk about the future of automation, how that intersects with our workforce, and preparing them also for sort of an automated future as it goes along. And those, I think, combined with some of the infrastructure improvements that you're talking about how do we advantage mobility in this space. And so I think that those are some of the pieces that we're looking at here as people have been talking about this. I'm trying to think, Jill, you commented about making buses awesome. And that's a great and easy statement to say. What do you mean? How would you make buses awesome? Is it the time that we were just talking about? Is it what Antoine was talking about around the public prioritization? How do you make them awesome?
Yeah, it's all the things that we were talking about, that they're fast, they're not stuck in congestion, they're frequent. I can walk out to a street like Colfax or Federal and I know a bus is going to come in the next 5 minutes, no matter what time of day it is or what day of the week it is. And it's reliable. I'm not wondering where the heck is my bus. I thought it was going to be here 10 minutes ago. And if you do that, people will actually ride it, which is the point.
Right. And I think that's been shown in a lot of different places, and collaborating with sort of other opportunities for transportation to get to those buses, such as bike racks, et cetera. But maybe should we just close on having Danny talk about donuts, because that might be the best way of getting.
And I love that we've got gluten-free and vegan options available.
I mean, I would only be able to partake if it was gluten-free. So of course I have to look out for myself.
Me too. Oh. All right. Well, I think it was absolutely terrific conversation. Thank you all for your input. We will assemble all of this. Again, if you have ideas as you're falling asleep tonight, you're like, I should have said this, but send us an email or get onto that survey and send us information. It's still open. And we want to continue this process and ideation of coming up with great ideas for RTD to consider. I think we have just such a tremendous opportunity right now to help rebuild RTD in a really terrific fashion, make buses awesome, and get us back onto the path that will get us towards that sustainable outcome and a really great service for our community. So I'm very excited about it, and I'm happy to be working with all of you and these great ideas that you have coming forward. So next, we're going to wrap up the meeting. We may even wrap up a couple minutes early. We're a model of efficiency. Julie is going to tell us a bit about the public engagement that's planned and then next steps for the process.
Thank you so much, Holly. And thank you so much for everybody's inputs. Boy, you guys are quite the brain trust. We've got lots and lots and lots of ideas. And I think what we did today really encapsulates us moving forward with the public engagement. When we're outward facing on this is all about no stone unturned. We want every amazing idea that is out there from everyone that uses the system, doesn't use the system, and is engaged at whatever level. So that really that's our focus moving forward, is just to continue focusing on these strategies. The other key I would say about public engagement moving forward is it's about flexibility. We don't exactly know where we're going to end up. Boy, we sure would love to start getting out and into the communities and doing more face-to-face, but we're going to have to see how the social distancing requirements change and evolve over the next few months. So really about flexibility and about gathering every great idea that we can and making sure that those voices that aren't, that are a little harder to engage or traditionally haven't been as engaged, we're really involving them. So what does that look like? Obviously, we want to leverage all the good work we did last year. Holly had mentioned that we did a 2020 community survey, a statistically valid survey, lots of great information in there. We're going to be digging through that to make sure that we get any strategies that are coming out. The project website is going to continue. In fact, we're going to keep this survey open for another couple of weeks because we want to keep getting feedback. But in April, we're going to have a whole new thing stood up on the website. So anybody that has questions about Reimagine, sending them to the website. There are going to be plenty of opportunities for them to give us ideas through that system. However, we recognize that everybody, accessing everybody or getting everyone access, or I should say, to the website is not always easy. So we want to make sure that we're highlighting certain target audiences and really making sure we're having individual discussions with them. Customer is a big focus for us. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're hearing from the folks that use this system, that are really, that need this system, that are really engaged with RTD. So a couple strategies on that. We've got, simple stuff like, working on some posters and things that we can put on buses and at the facilities so that people can, go to the website and provide us feedback. But we're also going to reach out directly. We've got quarterly customer service panels where we're going to be working with RTD to get some questions in theirs, as well as there's these wonderful surveys that have been done for a long time through the LIVE program. So that's targeting the discounted. And so those individuals, maybe a little on the lower socioeconomic, phase, having them give us ideas. Let's talk to them about what those barriers are. So we're actually getting to the folks that are using the system. Additionally, really want to continue a lot of the good work we did last year to make sure that we're targeting certain populations and organizations that are very, very, have a specific focus for RTD. So we've met with groups such as the AFL-CIO to talk about essential workers and their needs. We've met with the VA, and we're going to continue doing that again. We've met with the Colorado Center for the Blind. So these are some of those examples of just really making sure that we're identifying these equity communities and reaching out to them directly. So we'll continue a lot of that. Something that's going to be a little bit new that we're excited about is doing your traditional, we call them speakers bureaus, where you go out into different organizations that are very engaged in these types of issues. But you see the framework we have now. So we have the guiding principles. So what we'd really like to do, and love your feedback, so hop on the chat if there's anything any ideas you have, because we really want to target a lot of these discussions to those groups and organizations that are either the most knowledgeable about that topic or the most passionate about that topic. So for example, Holly's mentioned a couple of times about workforce, right? We're going to work with the employees. We want to sit down with the employees. They're the closest to this issue. So we're going to be doing several different things to reach out and get that feedback. You talk about mobility. Obviously, we've got the TMOs and the TMAs, local partnerships, local agencies, those types of things. So follow up with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what sort of organizations we can bring to this, whether it's organizations specifically focused around the guiding principles, organizations or individuals that you feel haven't been heard or haven't been represented as strongly in the past. We'd love your feedback, because this is going to be something we're really going to be targeting and spending a lot of time over in 2021. And then finally, in August and October, we are going to do some formal, more traditional public meetings. They could be virtual, they could be face-to-face. Again, we'll have to kind of see how that goes, but we're going to do 2 rounds of meetings, 5 meetings each in August and October. And at that point, we're going to have spent several months gathering all these ideas. And so by that point, we'll have some stuff, have some information, have some suggestions, have some recommendations that then the public can start reacting to. So that's a large part of what we'll be focusing on in August and October. But again, we consider you guys our think tank. We want to know what your thoughts are, any suggestions on groups and organizations and meetings, and we would love your help with that. And then finally, from a next steps perspective, Holly mentioned in April, we're going back to the board to continue the discussion on guiding principles. We'll be providing the feedback that you have provided us today. And then coming back in May, we are excited. This scenario planning piece is going to be very engaging and very forward thinking, and we're very excited about it. So stay tuned with us. In May, we'll be coming back with that. And then in the meantime, just keep the ideas coming, because there is nothing more helpful to us than to hear from people like you that have sit in a different place, have a different perspective, have different needs. And we want to hear all that in terms of strategies. So thank you so much for your continued engagement.
Fantastic. Thanks. Thanks everybody for your time today. Again, if you have ideas as you're falling asleep tonight, send them our way. We want to hear from you. Keep them coming, and we'll send out some notes on the meeting and plan on seeing you in May. Thanks all.